All right, just a quick question. How many of you have ever made a bad decision? Okay, every hand should be up. How many of you have made a really, really, really bad decision? Anybody? Anybody? Come on, what's the level of really, really bad? I would guess most of us have made a really, really bad decision. How many of you have ever made a decision where you needed rescued out of that decision? Anybody? Where you thought, man, this decision has got me into a place where I don't like where I'm at. And I don't know how I'm going to get out of this unless someone or something rescues me out of it. It was the summer after my senior year in high school, and several friends and I decided to go to Lake Fork, which is down in Texas, and it's known as one of the greatest bass fishing lakes in the country. And so we're headed down, and we didn't have a boat, so we decided to rent a boat. And this place rented a boat to 3 18-year-old boys. They didn't ask us if we had any experience with a boat. Nothing. They just said, here's the keys, here's the boat, and enjoy. And so we load the boat up, and we take it down to the water, and we put it in Lake Fork in Dallas, Texas. And we start going, and we're out in the water, and we realize that water is beginning to come into the boat. Now, we don't have a ton of experience with boats, but I knew that wasn't good. And I knew that there shouldn't be water in the boat. And so we had been planning this trip forever, and so we're trying to figure out what to do, but in the midst of trying to figure out what to do, we also wanted to fish. And so we were taking turns bailing water out of the boat while other people were fishing. So one guy's bailing, 2 people are fishing. And I knew it started getting bad when I realized that stuff in the boat was now floating around in the boat. And the water is beginning to rise more and more, and we have no idea what's going on. Now, if you're familiar with boats, you may have an idea. The company that gave us the boat didn't put a plug in the back of the boat. Now, if you don't know anything about a boat, for some reason, there's a hole in the boat that allows you to release water if it gets into the bottom of the boat. Well, it also keeps water from going into the boat when you're in the water, and there was no plug on the boat. And we're now sinking. And this is not like a canoe boat. This is a small bass boat. And so we're starting to sink, and we're still fishing, and we end up in this cove, and we sit down on a stump. Right? So there's a stump underneath, and our boat just sits down on the stump. And we were relieved because we were like, okay, now we can fish because we're not going to sink. And so we're stuffing things in the hole, and honestly, it's in this moment we're like, let's just pretend that it's not happening. I promise. We've invested in it. We've spent money. We've driven hours. We want to fish. We want to catch a big fish. And so we literally, for a while, pretend that the boat is not full of water. It now is almost as high as the water on the outside. So it's just, boat is in the water. We're standing in the boat, fishing. Then we get to a point where we realized we probably need help. We probably need help out of this situation. And so we whistle at these guys with a boat, and they come over, and they tie onto our boat. And for some reason, we thought, if we could just get the boat off of the trunk, off of this pillar, we could fire up the engine, and we could take off fast enough that the water will all come out. We're 18-year-old boys with no boat. And so he pulls us off, and immediately, the boat flips and sinks, and we bail, and we're floating in the water, and we get back on this guy's boat, and we go in, and I have to tell this guy, we just sank your boat. We don't have a boat to give you. It's in the cove. It's at the bottom with all of our fishing stuff. So we sat on the bank of Lake Fork thinking about what could have been. Now, our decision to not check the plug maybe wasn't our problem, but we should have checked it. If we would have known what we were supposed to do, we should have checked the plug. Well, we didn't, and it put us in a difficult situation. But what got us really in a difficult situation is when we pretended it wasn't happening. If we would have, in the moment, turned around and went back to the dock and said, look, you didn't give us a plug, everything would have probably been okay, but we didn't. We're looking at the story of Jonah, and Jonah's kind of found himself in this position. This position of saying, look, my decisions have put me in this place, and I'm going to pretend that it's not happening, but it is. And Jonah's gotten to a place where he has to be rescued. Now, the God we're going to talk about in the story of Jonah and continuing to talk about in Jonah is a rescuing God. He's a rescuing God. From the very beginning, when Adam and Eve make a horrible decision to disobey God, he put into practice, he put into the motion of rescuing his people from the very beginning. Even as people, the Israelites, they get into bondage, they're in slavery, and God is going to rescue them out of it. And Jesus comes on a rescue mission. He comes to seek and save and to reconcile us back to God. This is the story. As you read this is the story. He is a rescuing God. This is what he is about. And Jonah is experiencing this firsthand. So here is an impossible story. We looked at this last week. If you're here today and you say, look, this is one of those stories that makes it hard for me to believe the Bible. A man is swallowed by a fish, he lives for 3 days, and he makes it out alive. Yeah, right. That's impossible. And I agree. I'm with you. It is an impossible story. But this is where we believe God intervenes. He intervenes into the impossible and makes things possible. So I agree that it is impossible. But what if? What if this God that created everything could make the impossible possible? And I believe that's what happens in this story. Jonah gets this word from God. We don't know how he gets it, but we know he has this clear word from God to go to this place called Nineveh. And God says, Jonah, go. He doesn't ask. There's no ask here. God says, Jonah, go to Nineveh. And Jonah says, no. You have told God no at times. I've told God no at times. Jonah says no. And not only does he say no, but Jonah says, I'm running. Doesn't run from Nineveh, doesn't run from family. He runs from the presence of God, as if that can happen. Jonah says, I can't do anymore. I know what you're asking me to do, and I'm fleeing. I'm running. I'm getting as far away from the presence of God as I can. And so he goes down to this little town called Joppa, and he gets on a cargo ship, and he sails for Tarshish. Now, this is a town in a city in Spain, and at that day and age, it was as far as you could possibly go. Jonah was running to the ends of the earth to get away from the presence of God. Now, we talked about this week 1 and looked a little bit about it week 2. Nineveh was a horrible place full of really bad people. Think of ISIS. Think of the stories we hear of what's happening to Christians with ISIS. These were those people in Nineveh. They were the Assyrians. It's northern Iraq, and they were skinning people alive. And they were known to be really good at it. They could keep them alive the longest. And these are the people that God says, Jonah, go to those people. Go to those people and tell them to stop. Jonah says, no. I'd rather not do that. And I'm going to run. And so he runs and he finds himself in this ship in the sea. And then God, it says, then God sends the wind and it stirs the waves. So much so these sailors who have experienced this before, they knew the storms, they knew this was more than just a simple storm. They each begin to call out to their God, and they even throw the cargo off the ship. That they're fighting for their lives. And let me say this, and we've looked at this. Jonah's decision carries consequences for other people. Sailors didn't ask for it. They hadn't disobeyed, but Jonah did it. Because Jonah disobeyed, the sailors are going to pay for it. There's consequences. There's consequences for our decisions, for ourselves and for the people around us. And so the sailors try and figure out what to do, and then they remember Jonah in the boat, and so they go down, and Jonah is asleep. Jonah's pretending that this is going to go away. Jonah is going to pretend like it's not happening. And they go down, and they wake Jonah up, and they say, hey, do you know what's happening? Do you realize we're about to die? Maybe you should call on your God. But by the way, who are you? And in that moment, Jonah says, look, I worship the God of the land and the sea. And then they remember, Jonah, you're running from God. You're running from God, and this is what's come of that. What are we to do? And Jonah says, throw me off the boat. It's not what I would have said first thing, but Jonah says, throw me off the boat. If you throw me off the boat, you'll live. And so the sailors try to do some other things, but eventually they throw him off the boat. And at some point, from the sailors picking them up to throwing them overboard, I have this feeling that Jonah thinks, what now? What now? So Jonah hits the water, he begins to swim, and it says, but the Lord provided a fish. But the Lord provided a fish. You have these but the Lord moments. And the series I'm praying is one of those but the Lord moments where God captures your attention again. That he comes to rescue you, he comes after you once again. But the Lord. But the Lord provides a fish. And then in chapter 2, the first statement in chapter 2 is the best. It says that Jonah from inside the whale prays to the Lord. And it's kind of this, yeah, I bet, right? I mean, he's inside the whale. He's probably not going to make it in his thought, and he's going to pray. And the Bible says that in his distress, that he calls out to God, and God hears him. He hears him. Jonah's put himself there. This was Jonah's decision. And he cries out, and this God who is relentlessly pursuing Jonah, with this relentless grace, is ready to answer the call. And then Jonah says, look, there are these people who cling to worthless idols. They cling to things that will never fulfill, and in doing that, they forfeit the grace that could be theirs. Jonah's speaking about himself. He's saying, look, I was clinging to my own will. I was clinging to my own ways. I was clinging to what I wanted. And in doing that, he was forfeiting the grace of God. And so we do that. I remember doing that a lot in my teenage and my college years and even now. I cling to things that I think are going to fulfill me. So you cling to getting married. If I could just get married, then everything is going to be okay. Once I have my first child, that will fulfill me and give me purpose and satisfy everything that I need. If I get the promotion, if I get the right job, and so we cling to those things, and then we get them. We grasp them and we hold on to them. And it's like this bucket that's full of holes that gets filled up and it just never stays. It seeks out and we're always looking for more. And Jonah says, look, God, you're the only one who can rescue me. You're the only one who can save me. And at the end of chapter 2, it says that God commanded the fish to vomit Jonah up on to dry land. All right, so that's where we find ourselves, Jonah 3. If you don't own a Bible, we'd love to give you one. There should be one that looks like this around you. That's our gift to you. It'll also be on the screen if you want to use a smartphone or whatever. I think it's great to have it in front of you. But it's on page 917 in this Bible if you need help getting there. So we're going to read this and we're going to break it down as we go. Chapter 3, verse 1. It says, Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. Verse 3, Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now, it is kind of humorous in the way, like Jonah's like, yeah, I'm going to do whatever now. I'd rather not go back into the belly of a fish. But we're going to stay here just for a few moments. When I read this amazes me. This amazes me. God says, Jonah, go, and Jonah says, no, and he runs, and God runs after him. God doesn't say, okay, fine, I'll find someone else. You said no, one chance, it's over. He runs, and he runs after him, and he provides every opportunity for Jonah to come back. Jonah comes back, and God again says, look, I want you to go to Nineveh. He doesn't ask. This is interesting. He doesn't ask. He tells Jonah, go. He tells Jonah to go. And Jonah says, yes. This God that we talk about, this rescuing God, is a God of second chances and third chances and fourth chances and fifth chances. I hope you've experienced this. If not, maybe today is but the Lord kind of day. That God gives you these second chances. That Jonah could have missed out on doing something great, but God doesn't let him. And so God is trying to give him every opportunity what he has planned for him. It's kind of when you ask a little kid a question to do something, and you ask it as a question as if they have an opportunity to respond. So you would say things, or I say things with my kids like, can you go brush your teeth? And that's really not a question. It is a go brush your teeth. But as little kids, Cademan, who's 4, thinks, no, I'm not going to go brush my teeth. And then I have to say, okay, it wasn't a question. Go brush your teeth. God oftentimes will tell us to do things. God oftentimes will tell you to stop doing something. And we take it as if it's a question. No, God, I'm not going to listen to that one. Or God wants you to start doing something. God has a specific journey or the specific path that he wants you to take. And we tell God no as if it was a question. But it's not. And so he may be asking you to do something. He may be telling you to do something. And maybe you've said no. And so maybe you can relate to this. Maybe you've known that God has asked you again or told you again. That God relentlessly pursued you. That he didn't let you go after you blew it the first time. That he came after you. So how many chances do you feel like God has given you? How often does he pull at you to stop doing something? God will often nudge us. He won't push us. He won't even necessarily punish us, but there's going to be times where he's prodding us. He's saying, stop, stop. And we constantly don't listen or we push it away. So Jonah's no didn't turn God away from him, and it hasn't you either. So if you've told God no, and here's what I think, in a group like this, often what happens is we haven't necessarily told God no, we've just told God not right now. I know this is what you want me to do, and I'm going to, but just not right now. And so we push pause, and we do what we want to do, and then God comes back to us and says, no, this is what I want you to do, for real. This is what I want for you. And he gives us another chance at what God has asked us to do. And so you may be really, really stubborn. I am really, really stubborn. But even with me being stubborn, God is steadfast. So even though I'm stubborn, God is steadfast, and he is steadfast with his love and his grace and his pursuit of me. And it was with Jonah as well, and he's given Jonah another chance. Because God could have let Jonah die on the boat. Jonah could have died in the water. God could have allowed that to happen. God could have punished him. He could have went after him. He could have but the Lord with the fish, and he could have allowed Jonah to die in the fish, and that would have been fine. I mean, Jonah ran. But he doesn't. Because God is a God of second and third and fourth chances. But why wait? Why wait? I mean, what could we be missing out on? And so Jonah comes back, gets a second chance, and it says that Jonah obeys. So maybe you feel like you've blown it. Maybe you feel like your marriage should be over, but the Lord gave a second chance and a third chance with your marriage. Maybe you feel like you've blown it with your kids. You screwed up, you wish you could have done things differently, but the Lord has kept you close to your kids and is giving you more chances. Maybe you've blown it, but maybe God is giving you another chance. Here's the other thing. God gives Nineveh a second chance. Right? Not only is it dependent on Jonah getting a second chance, but Nineveh is getting a second chance. Nineveh is going to get an opportunity for someone to come and to help correct them. So God tells Jonah to go a second time, and Jonah obeys. And so when he asks Jonah to do it a second time, he doesn't bring up the past. Right? Because God could have said, look, Jonah, remember I asked you last time and how that went, and you ran, and you ended up where you ended up. Like, remember that, Jonah? So you probably shouldn't say no this time. God doesn't do this. He doesn't hold Jonah's past over his head. He's not going to do that to you. He's going to urge you. He's going to nudge you. He's going to ask you to do what he's asking you to do. And then he's going to give you the choice to do it or not. But he's going to relentlessly pursue you with this relentless grace. And I think one reason this is hard for us is because we don't live life that way. We don't live life in a way when someone hurts us and we forgive them that it's easy to let it go. Like, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at that with Heather, my wife, oftentimes. She may do something that, she's not here today, so I can talk about this, but I'm talking positively. But she may do something, she may be tired or whatever, and we have our moment, and she just doesn't do what I want her to do. And I get upset, and I get mad, and she'll say, will you forgive me? And I'll forgive her, but then it's hard for me not to bring it up again. It's hard for me not to say, do you really feel bad about this? I don't think you've said sorry enough or the right way. I'm not good at that. She's much better at that. She's much better at taking that forgiveness and letting it go. And so sometimes we're not good at that, and so because we're not good at that, we're like, God, okay, God, I know it says that you forgive me, but do you really? Are you really going to give me another opportunity? Are you really going to give me a second chance? It's hard oftentimes to believe, but that's what happens. And so Jonah goes. All right, let's jump back into it. So verse 3, it says, Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very important city, a visit requiring 3 days. On the first day, Jonah started into the city, and he proclaimed, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. How's that for a message? Wow. Hey, Nineveh, guess what? Your time has come. The interesting thing is there's no hope here, right? There's no message of hope. There's just this message of, look, you've done wrong, and you're going to be overturned. That's the message that Jonah goes in to preach. It's a simple enough sermon. You have 40 days before something bad happens to you. So stop skinning people. I mean, that's what Jonah's saying. Quit brutally murdering people. It's not going to go well for you. Verse 5 says, the Ninevites believed God. Why? Why in this moment did the Ninevites believe that their time has come? Okay, so this is me totally reading into this and just after study and thinking what could have happened. I wonder what Jonah looked like. I mean, can you imagine what Jonah appeared like to these people? Scientists have researched this and studied it and said that Jonah probably had an unhuman gray color to him. 3 days in a fish, he probably looked ghost-like. And let's just state the obvious, he probably didn't smell very well. I don't know if you've touched a fish, you smell for hours, if not days. For 3 days, he lived in a fish. And he walks into this city and says, look, the time has come. You have 40 days, and you're going to be overturned. And I wonder how many people said, what's your story? Right? How did you end up here? And Jonah says, look, I had an opportunity too. God told me something, and I said no. Look at me. God is serious. Listen, God is serious about this, Nineveh. He's not playing around. You've told no, God, a lot, Nineveh. Me too. Me too. And God came after me, and God is coming after you. Why would they not believe his story? Why would they not believe what God is saying and begin to think, okay, what are we to do? Now, what about you? What's your story? What's your past look like? What story, when you walk into a room, do people connect with you about because that's been your journey? In what way could God use you in your past? Look, oftentimes I think that we think our past disqualifies us from being used by God. But what if it's your past that completely qualifies you to be used by God? What if it's your journey that God wants to use and say, look, me too. Me too. This was Jonah's story. He steps in and says, me too. And the Ninevites believe God. There's this guy named Christian Hosoi. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of this guy. Here's a picture of him. I remember I was born in 80. And so I remember in the mid-'80s, everyone skated. And there were these wide boards, different than maybe what gets used today. And I remember I had a board like this. I never skated on it, but I would sit on it, and I would go down big hills because I could never stand on a skateboard. But this guy named Christian Hosoi, and I would guess most of you don't know him or his story, but he was one of the greatest skaters in the 80s. Everyone knew him, especially if you lived in California, and he was skating at the same time as a guy named Tony Hawk. Many of you know the story or know about Tony Hawk. Christian Hosoi was better than Tony Hawk. And he was doing all kinds of new things, and he was just, he's making a new way for skaters. He was skating in pools, dried pools, and this was new during the time. And so Christian Hosoi was doing amazing things, but he got caught up in the wrong crowd. And his story says at the age of 10, he begins to smoke weed. At the age of 12, he begins to do acid. And at 13, 14, he's doing cocaine. He got into every club he wanted to get into, and at 13 or 14, he had any girl he wanted. And at some point, he gets completely messed up and starts using crystal methamphetamines. This guy has everything. Every ability that he wants, everything that he could actually desire, he's getting. On a flight from LA to Honolulu, he's arrested because he's carrying 1.5 pounds of methamphetamines. And he's arrested and he's sentenced to 10 years in prison. And so he goes to jail, and in jail, very early on in jail, he finds a Bible. He finds a Bible and he begins to read the story of God and God rescuing people. And it was in a jail cell that Christian Hosoi begins to follow Jesus. He experienced this idea that his shame is undone. He talks about it just being this weight that's taken off of his shoulders. He serves 4 years in prison. 4 years in prison. You know what he does now? He's out and he skates. He skates. He travels the world skating. He's still one of the best skaters, especially at his age. But you know what else he does? He tells his story. He tells a story. And you know who listens? Young boys who skate. I lived in California for a couple of years, and all the boys would skate and surf. And they didn't want to always listen to me because I couldn't skate and I couldn't stand up on a surfboard. But they would listen to this guy. They would listen to this guy because he had a story. Jonah has a story, and the Ninevites listen to it. You do too. What you think disqualifies might actually qualify you to be used by God. So what is it? Is it your grief? Is it an addiction? Is it a divorce? What is it? What's your story? Is it the fact that you ran away from God and that God relentlessly still continued to pursue you? What is it? Because I wondered if someone needs to hear your story. Your story. The other thing that's really interesting here is I think it's God moving. I think it's God doing something. I speak, but I can't make any of you do anything. I can't make any of you do anything. But God, with the help of the Holy Spirit, can stir something in you. And so I wonder if God uses Jonah as a mouthpiece, but God begins to stir in the hearts of those people who live in Nineveh. What if you could use your story? What if you would quit avoiding your story or pretending that that part of your life didn't happen? And that you could be honest and it have an impact on someone else. Okay, so here we go. So the Ninevites respond to the belief that in 40 days it's going to be overthrown. Let's jump back into it. The Ninevites believe God, and they declare a fast, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. When the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. Okay, what's going on? We don't necessarily do this kind of thing anymore, and so sackcloth and dust was this act of putting on ashes, to cover yourself in ashes. And the reason you did this was a sign of humility and a sign of mourning. And so they hear that something bad is going to happen, and they think, man, we have to be humble in this moment, and we have to mourn. We have to mourn. And so here's the thing. It wasn't just the lowly people. It's the king who steps off his throne, who removes his robe that signifies who he is. And he humbly covers himself in ash and says, God, you and you alone. You and you alone are the only one that can rescue us at this point. Verse 7. Then he issues a proclamation in Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, do not let any man or beast, herd or flock, taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. The king says, nobody do anything. Don't let your animals work. Cover them as well. And together we're going to urgently call on this God. We're going to urgently beg him to do something, to change his mind and to change his ways. But this was never an option. This was never an option. Jonah doesn't give him that part of the story. But something happens to this king. something happens where this king actually believes that God may have compassion on him. Look, let's keep going. Verse 9, who knows? God may yet relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. These Ninevites who were bad people had done really, really bad things. Believe that maybe God is full of compassion. That maybe God will relent. That maybe this relentless grace and mercy could be theirs if only they would call upon the Lord. That's us. What if we really believed that if we called upon the Lord, that he would have compassion on us? That he wouldn't punish, but he would bring us back? And it's because he's full of compassion. Verse 10, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he had compassion and did not bring upon them the destruction he had threatened. I don't know how bad you think you are. I don't know if you think you're too far gone. But do you remember who the Ninevites are? Do you remember how evil they were, what they were doing? And God relents. God has every right to punish. God has every right to wipe them off the face of the planet. But this God is a God of second chances. And now not only has Jonah experienced it, but so have the Ninevites. Have you? Have you experienced this God of second chances? Greg and the band are going to come up, and we're going to end with that song that God's love never fails. And here's what I want us to do as we sing this song. Would these not just be words? Would they not just be words, but may they be something that we actually believe? That it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how far you've run trying to get away from the presence of God. He has run after you. He's run after you, and he's relentlessly after you. And he's trying to give you grace and mercy. But let's not stop there. What if God would actually use you to make a difference in someone else's life? Here's two questions. Maybe you want to jot this down. Here's two questions I want you to wrestle with today. What will happen if you keep running? What will happen? What will happen if you keep running? What will happen if you continue to let the pause run on what God is asking of you? What will happen? We said last week, sometimes your decision puts you in the position that you're in. Where is it leading? You're going to lose your family? You're going to lose your job? We see it all the time. What is it for you? What if you quit running and you turn around and you realize God is there waiting for you? But what will happen? I know what happened when I kept running. What will happen for you if you keep running? And then the other question you have to wrestle with is, have you given up on you? Have you given up on you? God hasn't. God hasn't given up on you. He hasn't given up on your story, but what have you given up on? Have you believed that it's the end, that God can't use you anymore? It's not true. God used this guy, Jonah, who was disobedient, to make a difference. So much so that he saved a group of the most evil people that the world had ever known. What is it for you? Would you come back next week? Next week, we're going to look at what's behind all of this. Why did Jonah not want to go? What is Jonah's struggle with all of this? If you want to cheat, you can read this week if you want to know. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it next week. Would you stand with me as we sing? I want to pray for us. In these moments, there's these benches down here. They're not magical, but if you feel like you need to separate from the people around you, if you want to pray, you can do that. If afterwards, I'll be down here. If you want to pray with someone, I'd love to pray with you. But would you use these moments? Would this be a declaration of what you believe about God? Let's pray. God, thanks for your goodness, that no matter what I've done or what I will do, you have not left me. That you're relentlessly pursuing me. That even though I said no many times to many different things, you kept coming. God, would you help my friends here today? Would you help them to believe that they could be used, that their story matters, that it just might impact, it just might save someone else, it just might have an impact where someone else comes back to you and they quit running away. Would you help us this week? Would you use us this week in our story to make a difference in the lives of someone around us? I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.